My mother held the card I'd spent 2 weeks making over the kitchen trash can and let it fall, while 11 people watched. My sister had just given her a diamond bracelet. Mom looked at my card for exactly 2 seconds too long, then looked at me and said the best gift would be if I just disappeared from this family. Then she told me to leave before I ruined the mood. So I left. I was 3 blocks down the street when a car I didn't recognize pulled up beside me and stopped. The woman who got out was 80 years old, leaning on a cane, and when she said a name I had never once heard in my life, my mother went down on the porch steps like her legs had been taken out from under her. That was Mother's Day in May. What I found 5 weeks later, going through a client's box of old family letters, was worse. And what I did with it in September is the part my family still can't talk about. Welcome back to Hidden Truth Stories. This is the channel for the stories families keep folded away in a drawer, the ones that only make sense years later, once somebody finally says them out loud. If you've ever been the one who made the gift instead of buying it, stay with me. Drop a comment and subscribe. And before we go further, where are you watching from tonight? Type your city below. I read every single one. My name is Meredith Sloan. I'm 31 years old. I own a small bindery in the Highlands, 2 rooms and a back sink, where I repair old family Bibles, flatten wedding certificates that spent decades in a damp basement, and rebind photo albums for people who can't afford to lose what's inside them. I opened it 5 years ago with what was left of my father's life insurance and a table saw I still use every week. The house on Alder Court has cloth napkins on a Sunday. That's really the first thing you need to know about my mother, Renata. I parked on the street instead of the driveway, the way I always do, because I've been coming to these dinners for 31 years, and I know exactly how to leave a room quickly if I need to. I'd planned on staying 90 minutes. I only came at all because my niece, who is 8, mailed me an invitation in purple marker with the stamp on upside down. Inside, my sister Lauren had already set the table with name cards. Her husband Dean was carving a ham and talking about a work conference. And at 2 o'clock exactly, because my mother runs a holiday like a church service, Lauren set a long flat box in front of her, and the whole room made that particular sound rooms make. It was from the jeweler downtown. The bracelet inside caught the light from across the table. My mother put it on, turned her wrist so everyone could see it, and said the price out loud, twice, the way other people say grace. $14,000. The box went around the table like a certificate everyone needed to witness. My gift was still sitting in the canvas bag on my lap. I make books for a living, so I made her a book. 4 folded sheets sewn through the spine with waxed linen thread. The cover marbled by hand in my kitchen sink. Blue over cream, because blue is the only color she's ever said she liked. Inside, I'd tucked a photograph. I'd found it the winter before, going through a box of my father's old paperwork. A small, bent-cornered print of a little girl, maybe 7 years old, sitting barefoot on a set of wooden porch steps. I'd spent 3 evenings restoring it, flattening the crease, mending a tear with tissue so fine you could read through it. I thought it was my mother as a child. I thought she'd want it. She opened the card. She didn't look at the marbling or the stitching. She looked at the photograph for 2 full seconds longer than a person looks at something they don't care about. And her face went the color of the napkins. Then she stood up, carried the whole thing into the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash on top of the morning's coffee grounds. Nobody moved. She came back, picked up her water glass, and said, in her pleasant voice, the one she uses for the garden club, "The best gift would be if you disappeared from this family. Then, go on now, before you ruin the mood." 11 people looked down at their plates. Dean said, "Aw, come on now, it's her day." My niece started crying, and Lauren told her to hush. I sat there for exactly as long as it takes to fold a napkin, and then I got my coat. If you've ever been the one who gave more than you ever got back, tell me in the comments. What did your family say when you finally stopped trying? I did not run. I want that on the record, because by June, the story around town had hardened into Meredith stormed out. And I have never stormed anywhere in my life. I walked down Alder Court at the pace you walk when you're counting sidewalk cracks, so you don't have to think about anything else. I was maybe 3 blocks down when a car slowed behind me. It was an old town car with a magnet sign on the door for a local car service. The back door opened, and a woman got out with a cane, a canvas tote, and a cardigan despite the heat. The way people dress when they've lived somewhere warmer for a long time. Her name was Sybil Pace. She was 81. She was also, as it happened, my client. I'd texted her the address that morning to drop off a condition report on some family letters I was restoring for her, never once expecting she'd actually use it. She was still saying hello when my mother came out onto the porch to handle the stranger the way she handles everything. Chin up, hands folded. Mrs. Pace squinted into the sun, tilted her head, and said in a perfectly friendly voice, "Sandy? Sandy Pool?" My mother sat down on the top step. Then she went sideways, her shoulder hitting the railing, and the screen door banged twice against the frame while Lauren screamed for Dean to call someone. They took her to the hospital in town. I followed the ambulance in my own car, both hands on the wheel the whole way. In the waiting room, Lauren filled out the paperwork and wrote 2 names in the contact boxes. Hers and Dean's. I watched her do it and said nothing, because there's a kind of nothing that is louder than anything you could say out loud. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was almost anticlimactic. A fainting spell, low blood pressure, too much sun, and not enough food. They gave her fluids and sent her home that night. But I was standing at the window of her room when the nurse checked on her, and I saw my mother open her eyes, look straight at me through the glass, and turn her head away. And I heard her ask the nurse one question before she asked anything about her own heart. She asked whether that woman was still outside. That Thursday, Mrs. Pace came into my shop. I gave her the chair with arms, because 81-year-old knees don't love my stools, and she told me flatly that she hadn't meant to cause a scene in a stranger's yard. She wasn't a wealthy woman, and I want to be clear about that because everyone in town decided otherwise almost immediately. She'd managed a school cafeteria for nearly 30 years. Her son paid for a car service when she traveled, since she'd given up driving a few years back. Her collection was 2 boxes of letters and a photo album with the corner mounts coming loose. All of it from her parents' house 4 hours west, where the family had run a dry goods store on Persimmon Street until it closed decades ago. She wanted everything stabilized and boxed properly before she passed, so her son wouldn't throw it out. That was her word. Throw it out. At the door, with her hand on the frame, she said something in the most ordinary voice imaginable. "Your mother and I go back further than she'd like." I asked what she meant. She looked at me for a second, decided something, and then asked whether I thought the album should be rehoused or left in its original binding. That was all. She was 81, and she was polite. And polite is a door you can close on somebody without them ever hearing the latch. If you've ever had a stranger say one sentence that made your whole world tilt sideways, tell me in the comments. Did you chase the answer or let it go? 10 days after Mother's Day, my mother called me for the first time since the porch. She didn't ask if I was all right, and she didn't mention the hospital. She told me the house was going on the market, that a stager was coming Wednesday, and that the estate people would be pricing the contents. Then she said, "Everything in this house was bought. That's how you know it's worth something." I asked her for one thing. My father had built a workbench in that garage decades ago. Solid maple, 5 feet of it, covered in 30 years of knife cuts, like a map of everything he'd ever made. I asked if I could have it. She said the bench went with the house. I want to tell you about a memory from when I was 10, because otherwise, none of this makes sense. For my mother's birthday that year, I made her a photo album. Hole-punched construction paper laced with kitchen twine. Every photograph of the 4 of us I could find. Captions written underneath in pencil. It took me most of a month. My sister gave her a bottle of perfume our father had driven her to the mall to buy and paid for himself. And my mother thanked Lauren by her full name in front of everyone, held the perfume box up so the neighbors could see the brand. Then she took my album and said she'd put it somewhere safe. That July, looking for a bike pump, I found it in the garage trash can, under a bag of grass clippings, swollen with rainwater from an open window. I pressed it flat under my father's dictionary for 6 weeks. I never said a word about it to anyone. I put it in a shoebox on my closet shelf, and that shoebox eventually became the archival box I still keep on the top shelf of my workshop today. It took me 21 years to understand what I'd actually been doing up there, restoring one damaged, discarded thing after another. I thought I was repairing objects. I was filing an appeal nobody had asked me to file. I worked on Mrs. Pace's collection at night because daylight belongs to jobs that pay in 30 days. It's slow, careful work. Testing paper for acid, dry cleaning with a soft eraser crumb, lifting old cellophane tape with a heated spatula, a half-inch at a time. Everything reversible. Everything logged. What was inside those boxes wasn't treasure. It was a hardware order for 11 kegs of nails, a 1974 letter about a leaking roof, a note thanking a family for a casserole after a funeral. Ordinary life, which is the only thing worth conserving, because nobody ever thinks to save it. One of the old household ledgers had a column near the back headed Simply Help, listing names and small weekly payments. One surname in that column caught on something in my chest and wouldn't come loose. I couldn't have told you why. I closed the book, logged the date, and went upstairs. It took 19 more days to find out why. In the meantime, a call came from the town's Heritage Committee, the one my mother chaired, canceling a restoration contract I'd already ordered materials for, worth nearly a third of my shop's yearly income. Nobody on that call ever said an accusation out loud. Nobody had to. That's the thing about a small town. It doesn't need to raise its voice to end you. I sat down that evening and did the arithmetic. I had 4 months of rent and wages covered. After that, I had a table saw to sell. If you've ever lost something over a decision nobody would ever admit to making, tell me honestly, did you fight it, or did you go quiet and start doing the math the way I did? I drove out to Alder Court one last time to make my case for the workbench. The house didn't look like my mother's house anymore. White slipcovers, a bowl of fake lemons, every family photograph taken off the walls and boxed in the hall closet, including the ones with me in them. My sister met me at the door in a blazer with a real estate pin on it. She told me the bench had been listed as a built-in, and built-ins convey with the property. I offered to pay for it anyway. She laughed and said pulling it now would make the garage look unfinished in the listing photos. While we stood there, my niece came down the stairs sideways the way kids do, pushed something into my hand, and ran back up. It was the card. She'd gone into that kitchen trash can after everyone left on Mother's Day, taken it out, and hidden it in her sock drawer for 6 weeks. The coffee grounds had stained the marbling brown along one edge, but the photograph was still tucked safely inside. My father had built that workbench with a drawer nobody knew about. A strip of trim that looked ordinary until you pushed up on the left end and pulled. When I was small, he kept butterscotch candy in it, so I got down on the garage floor in my good clothes and pushed up on the left end. It still worked. Inside was a folded shop notebook and a sealed envelope with 3 initials written on the front in his handwriting. My father died when I was 19. I had spent every year since then believing he was the parent who never kept secrets. That night, close to 1 a.m, I put Mrs. Pace's old photographs on my light table. One showed the back of a farmhouse. 3 adults on the porch steps, and at the bottom, half out of frame, a girl of about 7, barefoot, arms around her knees. I turned it over. On the back, in pencil, someone had written a date, and beside the date, a name. It wasn't my mother's name. It was the name Mrs. Pace had said on that porch in May, right before my mother went down on the steps, like her legs had been taken out from under her. I sat very still for a long time, looking at a child's chin I had looked at across a dinner table for 31 years. And I finally understood exactly what my mother had spent her whole life making sure nobody ever found. So tell me honestly in the comments. If you found a photograph that unraveled everything you thought you knew about your own family, would you want the truth, no matter what it cost you? Subscribe if you want to hear what happened when I finally opened that envelope, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. I still have the bench, by the way. I bought it back from the new owners 8 months later, for 4 times what my mother once offered to sell it for. Some things, it turns out, are worth paying for twice.